What does reconciliation mean to you?
Reconciliation is such a big word that it's kind of hard to describe in just a few words, if that makes sense. It is about coming together. It's about the accepting and recognition and being able to share stories and be on the same playing field and being at the same level. Aboriginal people, we are way behind in things like education, employment, health, life expectancy, getting kids to year 12. And reconciliation is about recognizing those things as well and creating pathways and bridges to try to help close some of the gaps that actually exist. It's also about listening to our stories and hearing what Aboriginal people have said, hearing about our experiences, but also hearing about our dreams and aspirations. And we also want to hear from non-Indigenous people as well about how they are going to reconcile with our story, if that makes sense. It's kind of like I want to hear from as many non-Indigenous people, and I'm lucky because I do training and people come to me and go, you know what, I'm so glad that I've learnt a little bit about Aboriginal history today, because it's actually helping me reconcile my understanding of Aboriginal history, because this is something I never learnt as well. So how can I actually participate in the reconciliation process if I haven't actually reconciled what Aboriginal issues mean to me as a non-Indigenous Australian? And it is hard. It's not an easy thing to do. There are difficulties. It's not the most easiest thing to do. Is about listening to Aboriginal stories. They are sad. They are painful. They are quite confronting. And I think what people need to learn as part of that reconciliation is learn about their own, white privilege, learn about their own white fragility. And people often go, what's white fragility? That's when all of a sudden you're confronted with your white prejudice, thoughts process, and you start to panic. And that's the white fragility kind of cracking, is what I'm saying. And it's okay to experience that, but it's learning to be comfortable in, how do I actually deal with that? How do I switch that around for me to actually want to know more about Aboriginal issues? Why is it that I feel so uncomfortable? Why is it that I don't like this feeling? Explore it, get to understand it. Because as soon as you understand it, that's part of that reconciliation process. That's part of you reconciling your thoughts, your experiences in terms of understanding Aboriginal history.
Wow, thank you for that. It's a personal growth journey, isn't it?
It is.
How can you explain reconciliation to young children? Is that something you have any thoughts on, AJ?
I think it's really important to talk about the issues. Some early childhood educators are often scared to actually have the discussions. And I think they have to be age specific, and they actually have to have some sort of purpose. So it's about actually, if you are talking a bit about reconciliation, what does it mean to you as the educator first? I think about when I talk to kids, and even I know when I talk to Aboriginal kids like to hear what I'm thinking sometimes first, because then they know they're then allowed to think like I do, or they know they can think something different. And if they are thinking something different, they'll tell you that they're thinking something different. So I think when I work with really young kids, I try to tell them, this is what reconciliation actually means. This is what reconciliation means to me. Do you understand, where I'm coming from? And if they go, yep, I often then go, well, how do you feel about reconciliation? And I always do that. What do you feel, rather than what do you think? Because thinking sometimes is really hard for young people, but feeling is something very different. And I could explore that when they say things like, I feel sad, or I feel, upset, or I feel that it wasn't fair. But if I actually ask them that different question, what do you think? Sometimes it's really hard to put in what I'm thinking into words, but it's much easier to talk about the feelings that they're actually experiencing with it. And it's okay to feel exactly what they want to feel. It's also about exploring scenarios with young kids about, like if something, and I don't want to traumatize kids as well, because I've heard of some really bad stories as well in schools where teachers have actually, and it was the case where a school actually told a bunch of like primary kids that your parents aren't coming back to pick you up today and they've left you. Yeah. So you can Google search it, you'll find it. It was in a different state. It wasn't in Victoria. And the kids were so traumatized, but the school was trying to teach them what it was like to be part of the stolen generation.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a way. Creating fear for other people isn't a way to actually teach. It's you can't learn by fear, but you can learn when someone explains their fear to you, if that makes sense. So, I often have elders come to talk to early childhood groups, and the elders are not there necessarily to tell them their saddest stories about their own life, but to talk to them about things like the dream time, to talk to them about some of their experiences, but normally they're a little bit vague, and that's what you want from the elders initially with early childhood, is to get them to introduce to the concepts that, that sometimes my grandparents or the elders weren't allowed to go to school, or they weren't allowed to participate or speak language, or they weren't allowed to mix with their friends that were Aboriginal. So I think some of those early discussions are actually quite good, because it actually shows the kids that there has been some divide between Aboriginal people and non-Indigenous people. And it also, if you leave it with them for a while, they kind of explore that in their mind, and then they want to ask you more questions like, so what happened then? So what is it that we do? What do we need to fix in order to make the elders feel better now, if that makes sense? But I think it really does involve listening to stories and being patient. And I always say sometimes to be the best ally is to actually shut up and listen. And sometimes it's okay not to have opinion, or not to voice your opinion, because unfortunately it's not about you at the moment. It's about the Aboriginal narratives that you're actually hearing and wanting to hear.
And what would be your dream for reconciliation in the future, AJ?
Oh, that's a big one. I would like to see that, in 20 years, there isn't people like me going around trying to educate people on what reconciliation actually is, because I'm hoping by that stage people have actually got it. I think that's across, I always say to, Aboriginal liaison officers or the CESOs at schools sometimes, that it'd be really great in 30 years if our positions weren't there, because this is already embedded into the curriculum, into courses, into early childhood, or into community services courses. But I don't see that happening, if that makes sense, just yet, which means that we're still needed. And I'd like our history to be on an even par with the curriculum as it is now. Aboriginal issues it used to be just an elective at some stage. Like in some courses, it's still seen as a bit of an elective. And even though they're embedding it, sometimes it's embedded very, very well, this is what's happened just before colonisation, and then you've still got the next, I don't know, 10 lectures all around what happened afterwards. That Aboriginal issues is always the first lecture. The reality is, if the class goes for 10 subjects and 5 of them should be around Aboriginal history, the other 5 should be the equal part about what happened after colonisation and the impact that colonisation actually had on Aboriginal people. That's where I see the fairness that needs to actually occur. Because at the moment, I think we are at a disadvantage. Is that our part of the story is often so small, yet we've been in Australia for 65,000 years, but it's still just the small part of the story. We are starting to get acknowledged. That's the good part. But I don't think we're acknowledged enough for our stories and our grandparents' stories and our great-grandparents' stories and our great-great-grandparents' stories. So what does reconciliation mean to you, Bindi?
It means that all of Australia come together and we can, move together forward without the racism that's out there at the moment, without the misunderstanding and judgments and preconceptions of what Aboriginal people are and what we mean.
Yeah. What's your dream for reconciliation in the future?
To just be one, to honestly move together, be able to be happy in the country that we all reside in and we're going to share together for hopefully a long time. On my travels, I've been to other countries where they're just so patriotic and, regardless of the colour of their skin, they're just united. And I would love to see that we get to that sort of a point.
Do you think we would?
I don't see it in my lifetime.
Do you think in your kids' lifetime?
I would like to be hopeful, but, that's probably just 20, 30 years after me. And we make progress and then all of a sudden we go back, 10, 20 years. So I don't know. I hope so, but I'm not hopeful.
What activities can early childhood educators do to talk about reconciliation for young kids in the classroom?
Activity specific, I can't name them, but a lot of work about, just no hate, no judgment. Doesn't matter what colour you are, what shape you are, whether you're rich, you're poor, we're all the same at the end of the day, As long as we're happy or the kids are happy and without judgment, I think that's the start.
So, Kerry, what does reconciliation mean to you?
I see reconciliation more from a non-Aboriginal perspective, in that it's a hand reaching out, admitting that there were wrongs in the past, that we have a traumatic background as Aboriginal people, but there are allies out in the community who want to acknowledge our hurt and walk forward with us. So I see that reconciliation side coming more from the non-Aboriginal people, but they need to listen to us as Aboriginal people in that process.
I like that. Definitely.
Thank you.
How do you or can you explain reconciliation to young kids?
Teaching children about the word sorry, acknowledging that sorry is about someone getting hurt and taking responsibility for that hurt at times. Sorry is such a hard word to say when it comes to things, so that in itself is a huge process. But acknowledging that there are special days that we all celebrate together, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, and that Reconciliation Day or Reconciliation Week is about us all becoming friends and working towards it, towards a better future for all of us.
What activities can educators use in the classroom to demonstrate reconciliation?
There are so many books for early childhood as a resource, which is fantastic. So things like Sorry Day, Sorry. There are lots of, like, what was it? Antar had the all the hands across the lawns in Canberra. So, you know, decorating the hands using the Aboriginal colours and, you know, having lots of stuff on display. Sort of not so much being a tokenistic day, but maybe ramping up the activities that you're already doing that have an Aboriginal focus on, so that it's a little bit more visible than the regular stuff that you might already be doing. Inviting elders in to have a morning tea or something and listening to their stories, reaching out to community events that might be happening in your areas and things like that.
What's your dream of reconciliation for the future?
Never thought about it.
Right?
Never thought about it. It's just, yeah. I like it when non-Aboriginal people actually do the events and we as community can opt into those events instead of it being us driving it all the time. So, yeah, but never really actually thought about that, AJ. Thank you.
Kristen, what does reconciliation mean to you?
Reconciliation. Well, reconciliation to me, AJ, in a broad sense, is for Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people to learn from each other and strengthen relationships. You know, the idea of reconciliation is for non-Aboriginal people to recognise and understand the severe hardships and oppression that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been subject to and continue to face today, along with recognising traditional landowners.
How do you or can you explain reconciliation to kids?
It's a little difficult with the younger ones, although I would explain reconciliation to young kids or young children, young people, as strengthening relationships between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, the same as kind of before. You can teach young minds that same thing, although young children are not born racist. They're not born biased. It's taught to them. Yeah. So the very best way to teach reconciliation is lots of exposure to culturally appropriate activities, such as weekly Aboriginal specific lessons, you know, like arts and crafts. I remember when I worked in early childhood education, it was for a short time, but I got very fond memories. Like we made boomerangs, we read Aboriginal storybooks, you know, we sat in circles and did different cultural activities in general. Just make it a part of day-to-day learning.
What activities can non-Indigenous educators do in the classroom?
Well, there's loads of activities, AJ, loads of activities. There's nothing that's going to be tokenistic or inappropriate about getting an Aboriginal or Aboriginal specific or cultural specific storybook. You know, kids love stories, love listening to stories, you know, and the teacher can sit down, get the little group together and just read, you know, learn about Bunjil, learn about the rainbow serpent. There are countless kid books out there that teachers can actually do with their children. Or there's, you know, just very easygoing cultural games and activities. Or, you know, we can just do some art painting. You could get an Aboriginal flag or some little art and just let the kids go wild with it. You know, there's loads of Aboriginal specific games. You know, there's one that I played a lot growing up called Hunt the Kangaroo. I know it's very, sounds stereotypical, but it's not. You know, you just get a ball, especially for the little ones, and you get them to, you roll the ball across the ground, and the little ones use their hunting abilities with a softball and try to hit the ball with little balls, you know, building those skills, but it's still culturally appropriate and, you know, really good cultural activities for the kids. I'll just make it up.
That's right. Every time I cross the thing, it says when I see the video, I can find it really quickly when I'm not. Right.
Yeah.
So what would be your dream for reconciliation?
AJ, my dream for reconciliation would be for Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people to coexist without, it's very much a dream, but without racism, without stereotypes, without you know, why do I, without me going into an organization and telling somebody that I'm Aboriginal and them having no education, and they automatically ask me, really? You don't look like an Aboriginal. What part of you is that? I mean, what percentage of you is Aboriginal? You know, my dream is for, especially in workplaces, for everyone to have a basic or really good knowledge of what Aboriginal people have gone through, and, you know, to absolutely abolish and demolish stereotypes, you know, and the whole thing. I want us to learn from each other. I want there to be exactly what it is, reconciliation.
So, Nicole, what does reconciliation mean to you?
AJ, reconciliation is meaning more and more to me every day, because I love learning. And so I'm learning more and more about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture. For me, that's a big part of what reconciliation is about. It's about continuously learning. It's a lifelong commitment to learning. And it's about listening and listening some more and listening some more, and giving power and voice back to Aboriginal people, and being very grateful for any time and any knowledge that they are always so willing to share. So for me, reconciliation it really is about a lifelong commitment to continue learning more, and knowing that I will never know enough, but I want to continuously strive to gain more knowledge so that I can build a better understanding of, you know, the longest living culture in the world.
Cool. How do you explain reconciliation to young kids?
If I was to explain, and I have with my children, they're in education, in the education system here in Victoria, in Melbourne, and it's getting a little better, but there's certainly by no means enough from what I can see in their curriculums. And so I have spoken to my own children about reconciliation and talking to them about, you can't undo past wrongs. So that's not the angle I take. I talk about reconciliation in the way that, what commitments can you make sure that you action yourself, whether that be knowledge, learning, connecting with others. But I also think it comes along with upstanding as well, and making sure that you don't bystand any racism and you advocate and be an ally. And my children know that I'm really passionate about respectfully having a say and standing up for others. So that's how I see reconciliation when I'm talking to my own children or other children. I really see it as an opportunity to really upstand and make sure you do everything in your power to give Aboriginal people a voice.
I like hearing that about giving them a voice. Do you think that Aboriginal people don't always get their voices heard?
No, I don't, AJ. I think that there is a long way to go about making sure that Aboriginal people are placed in the limelight, in the forefront. Such great knowledge opportunities can be had if that's where we position Aboriginal people. And I do think that we need to do everything in our, whatever our capacity is, whether it be in education or if it's in local government or if you're voting, you need to try and do everything in your power to celebrate Aboriginal culture. And if that means that there's an avenue to put their voices first, then yeah, I do think we should do that. Yeah.
That's good to hear. What activities can you do in the classroom that demonstrates reconciliation?
I think what I would really like to see more of is a natural embedding of Aboriginal culture. And what I mean by that is absolutely no tokenistic Aboriginal tables or one display in the foyer and we tick box. That's not what that's about. It's about embracing a culture and supporting Aboriginal children to be able to thrive and to be able to thrive in their education and celebrate their culture and support them in their language. And so I think that, we need to make sure that our education and care services have got opportunities for Aboriginal children to do that. And we can't assume that we don't have any Aboriginal children enrolled in our services. I think I constantly come across that as a misconception, that people know for sure. And I am always saying you don't know for sure. There could be many reasons why you don't know that. So you need to set up your spaces to welcome and support Aboriginal children and their families so that they feel safe, physically safe, spiritually safe, their well-being, culturally safe. You can't determine that safety, but you need to liaise with as many organisations as you can and keep, and this is why I am very passionate about continuing to learn so that you get a good idea. You do the groundwork as an educator to know what protocols are, and that way, if a family turns up tomorrow, you can be, you're in a better position to welcome them safely. And then you can consult with them about how to make them personally safe, like you would any other family. But it's really important to set up your spaces to have positive racial identity. And so reconciliation for me is about making sure that you audit your spaces and make sure that they are welcoming, that they are safe. There is a wealth of resources that support all cultures with a strong focus on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, so that you have got an environment that does not look tokenistic and it has been intentionally thought about to be authentic.
What would be your dream for reconciliation in the future?
I think the dream would be that every single community, every local government, every education and care service, every adult has a good understanding of past trauma and understand that that still has an impact today. So for me, I would like to see all Australians understand that, and that it is something that is still pertinent today. It is still painful today. Invasion Day the ramifications of that are still causing horrific pain today. And I would like to see every Australian understand that. I would also like to see every education and care service authentically embrace all the different ways that we can connect with Aboriginal communities, organisations, so that we can continuously build capacity in how we include this way of this knowledge into curriculum, these perspectives into our curriculum. I'm lately talking a lot in all the services I go into in Victoria and saying, well, your learning frameworks, how are you including the Morung principles in your learning frameworks? It's a key framework. You've got your EYLF, you've got the VEYLDF, and you should have the Morung as well. These are your learning frameworks. So let's look at how we are being inclusive. So that would be my dream for reconciliation, AJ.
So what does reconciliation mean to you?
That's a really good question. It's my commitment to showing respect and building relationships with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It's me actually doing things as well and learning more. That's what I love about it. I learn so much more.
How can you explain to young kids about reconciliation?
Wow. The children are always curious. I mean, it would come from reading a book. So say if I read a book that was written by an Aboriginal author. And then going on from the conversations there, I wouldn't say to early childhood children, now we're going to do a RAP, it's a reconciliation action plan. I would just keep answering their questions honestly and from the heart, and say, look, who can we really ask? Who would really know? And go from there.
What activities can you do in the classroom that actually demonstrates reconciliation?
Yes, so when I was visiting centres, we did a lot of having acknowledgement of country on the walls. We set up with artists, Aboriginal artists, to do murals on kindergarten walls. We always involved Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, if we were given activities to do, we would do those as well. But we'd note too that it was, you know, Auntie Faye or Auntie Annette, or it was someone who actually had shown me what to do.
Yep. I'll ask you a question now. What is your dream for reconciliation in the future?
Self-determination. That's the big one. I just have visions of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people being so respected that they are leading, that we are looking for them for leadership. We are looking for them to look after our environment. We are looking to them for how to nurture children. We are looking for them to, you know, to learn how to listen and to tell stories, to share stories.
If you had to advise anybody else who's on their reconciliation journey, where would you suggest they start?
Go to now I've got to read this, the Narragansett website. I love that website. It is just so user-friendly. You can feel it talking to you, and you can ask any questions and you'll find that answer on that website.
So Alana, what does reconciliation mean to you?
Okay, so in its simplest form, my understanding of the word reconciliation is righting a wrong. And in order to do that, we need to listen, we need to hear, we need to know what was the wrong. And then, you know, okay, I might not have been alive when my ancestors, I'm a settler Australian, I'm not a migrant. My ancestors were around, and I don't know what happened. I don't know even if they played a part in all of the atrocities. Who knows? But accepting responsibility, the fact that I'm still actually benefiting off all the suffering from those that have gone before, but also current, that there's still a blind eye, my understanding, and this is what Aboriginal voices are still saying, that we're suffering from intergenerational trauma. It's happening right now. So accepting responsibility is a big, big part of reconciliation. Yeah, I think that would be probably my big take from that.
How do you explain reconciliation to young people?
So with children, again, I think you can easily use things that they can relate to. You know, they've particularly in early childhood, because one of our major focuses as teachers and educators is social and emotional learning. Reconciliation can be woven into anything, every day, conversations. It might be just something like, you know, a child finds a caterpillar in the garden, for example, and you start talking about the caterpillar and what it might do and what it's going to turn into a butterfly. And then, you know, you can just, and this is what I have done, is just, I wonder what it'd be like for a little child, you know, maybe, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, who found a caterpillar before, maybe who was on country and and they look at you, they cock their head, and they've got that beautiful curiosity, and then their beautiful conversations open up. Lots of opportunities for reconciliation, for discussing things like that. And so it doesn't have to be a particularly, oh, I've got to do an activity on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures or whatever, you know, perspectives or whatever. It's it can be woven into everything. And so they understand the meaning of the word in their whole context.
So what activities can you do in the classroom that demonstrates reconciliation?
So I probably answered that a little bit by just saying, you know, you can weave it through the program into anything. Don't wait for a particular moment where, oh, this will be good for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture or whatever. But in saying that, there are many, well, on the Narragansett website, if anyone wanting guidance, there's some really great resources and ideas there. But locally, the first thing they will do is then send you back and say, go local. So while that's there as a national support, it's always come back to your local area. So look out, bring in culture, you know, Aboriginal people, Torres Strait Islander people who run cultural workshops, that kind of thing. And the children will learn and you will learn as well. And there's a lot more available now, accessible, that can bring in dance, creativity. I think you interviewed, there was one fellow who came up from around Albury Way, where I used to live. Taylor Hampton. And and there was another one, Gudja Tamara man.
Jay Rottimer.
Yeah, so they were a couple of examples. So can certainly go to the AGECS Reconciliation Series 1 page, and there's a whole section on ideas of what to do.
Cool. What's your dream of Reconciliation Australia?
I really love the 5 outcomes on the Reconciliation Australia website, and I think that's a beautiful guide. But when I look at those 5 outcomes, I'm also saddened to see how we're falling short of them. And the race relations is one of them. You spoke about the 26th of January. To me, we're falling short, just that without anything else. That's one of them. The unity, you know, that we'll be proud of the Aboriginal heritage and Torres Strait heritage in Australia, that everyone in Australia will embrace it and actually really look up to, you know, the First Peoples and what they bring. And also because, okay, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have this beautiful past and present to bring. But while I'm doing my PhD on emotional well-being, I'm actually going into kind of post-humanist stuff, and there's a branch of post-humanists called new materialists, and there's one paper that I read that said it's not new materialism, NEW, it's KNEW, because so much of this stuff is the stuff that's brought through by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So really, we've got a way to go. And then there's a few others. There's there's the historical acceptance, there's equity, close the gap. When we close the gap. Early childhood actually has done pretty well for some of those outcomes, but I think ultimately it's the institutional integrity when we can get the government and the community and the businesses all aligned and we're all listening to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices.
So Alex, what does reconciliation mean to you?
So reconciliation to me means acknowledging and learning about the past so that we can move into a much better future. That's sort of how I conceptualize what reconciliation actually means and its purpose.
Yeah. So how do you explain reconciliation to young kids?
So I work with mostly 4-year-olds, and a lot of the children in my service are learning English as an additional language. Some of them only speak English when they're at kindergarten. So I find that the best ways to sort of incorporate ideas of reconciliation and perspectives is through really tangible activities. And I actually don't necessarily teach reconciliation as a topic. It's more a framing around why I'm incorporating and embedding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives in the first place. But I will do it in experiences, and I know sometimes they get a really bad rap as being tokenistic, but when you're working with children that don't speak much English, you need to have hands-on experiences that go along with what it is that you're talking about or learning about. So I do love the classic hand painting experience of explaining to children what the colours of the Aboriginal flag symbolise whilst painting it on their hands and creating some sort of poster. I find posters can actually be really helpful because it ties what you're doing to a thing. So this year, just recently actually, the council that I work in, Moreland, was renamed to Marybeck. And we made a poster with my group that just said, "Welcome to Marybeck." And it just seemed like a really, meaningful and significant reason to incorporate this flag-based activity. But a lot of the other things I do are more embedded rather than specific activities. So it's including language that I know and explaining the language that I know and where I know it from. Womanjeka in Victoria, in Melbourne specifically, is a really obvious one. But even other words and phrases that I've sort of added to my repertoire. So like a yarning circle, explaining to kids what a yarning circle is and incorporating those ideas into how we act and what we do at kinder. Things like that. Oh, and I've probably forgotten the most important one, which is teaching the children not a static, specific acknowledgement of country, but including the children in an acknowledgement of country on a very regular basis. And I think I learned from you, AJ, not to have one that is just word for word the same every time. So mine's never the same. And I'm sure sometimes I forget to include like the right phrasing or the right words, but it does definitely come from the heart. And the key ideas are there.
Cool. I've got a good question for you here, which is what will be your dream for reconciliation in the future?
Oh, that's such a good question. I love future thinking. I think using New Zealand as an example, and I understand it's really different because in New Zealand, there's one sort of group of First Nations people as opposed to Australia, where there are so many different groups, language groups, cultural groups. But just the idea that, an Indigenous voice is central to how the country runs. I mean, for starters, would be a, republic and in my future where we have reconciliation, we would no longer be a colony of the Commonwealth. It would be our own independent country. But it would just be a country where we really celebrate the fact that we're living on the land of the oldest living continuous culture in the world. And how is that not something that we're just, emanating pride from? So it's more of a general vibe that I'm feeling when I think of reconciliation in the future rather than like a specific, mandate. But it's one where every single person goes, wow, how cool is it that, we're amongst the oldest living culture in the world.
So Sandra, what does reconciliation mean to you?
To me, it's all about strengthening our relationships between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and the non-Indigenous for the good of all, to support equity and equality. I think for me, that's the most important thing.
Yeah. How do you or can you explain reconciliation to young kids?
Well, I think the best way to do it is through books and conversations. And I think, there's a few good books, and I've just noted down Sorry Day is a great book for children. Finding Our Heart the Uluru Statement, and Stories for Simon. And I think you find children are quite amazing when we allow their conversations to flow and allow honesty. And also the acknowledgement to country each morning, I think, is really important. And I think that acknowledgement of country that I've seen, it grows. And I really feel that acknowledgement of country grows that reconciliation for children, because once they understand the caring for country and caring for land and caring for people, they start caring for everything. And that's where we need to start.
What activities can you do in the classroom that demonstrates reconciliation?
Lots of provocations, using natural materials. When you're planning, you need to think about how can we embed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives. So a lot of people find it really difficult. I don't find it that difficult. Think about home corner. What's in our home corner? What is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives? So can we have pictures of bush food? Can we have some recipes? Can we have some, if we're lucky enough to have some bark, you know, that we can wrap food up to cook with? It's just about thinking what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives can we have. We can even have some little coasters that have got some beautiful artwork on them. We can have a picture from a calendar, from an Aboriginal calendar, and put it in a frame and hang it up in home corner. Children are interested in transport. Okay, let's think about Aboriginal transport. And we've got planes, haven't we? Qantas planes that have got beautiful, you know, Aboriginal work on them. So let's start thinking about how we can bring in the perspectives and contemporary perspectives in whatever it is that we've got.
Yeah. I like how you've been using the word contemporary a lot, because I think part of that is also reconciling the past with what's current at the moment.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so important because in the past, Aboriginal people weren't white. Now we have a mix. Yeah. So, you know, blonde hair, blue eyes, white skin, you know, and people still these days will say that person's not Aboriginal. So contemporary is really, really important. Contemporary means things change.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think the word contemporary is very important because things change and we don't want to be letting children think that Aboriginal people and where they live and what they do and where they go is the same as it was 100 years ago, because it's not.
Yeah. Thanks for that. A question for you, Sandra, is what would be your dream for reconciliation in the future?
No division. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are recognised for being the first people here, are consulted on our future of the land, Australia, and that we see a future of unity, equality and equity.
So what does reconciliation mean to you?
Well, it is so complex, isn't it? And I think for everyone it's different. For me, the two words that really go into my heart is healing journey. And for me, reconciliation is, it's everyone's responsibility to commit to this healing journey of the First Nations people. So it's maybe not quite right to compare it, but with climate change, it's everyone's responsibility to help and support sustainability and to do something. Everyone has that commitment. The more you learn about it, the more you want to do things about it. And I think this reconciliation, it's up to all of us to be advocates and to say, hey, let's learn more about it. And when you learn more about it, you will be wanting to do more about it, and to make sure that we are all contributing to the healing journey.
How can you explain to young kids in classrooms about reconciliation?
That is a really tricky one, especially with the really young ones. And so many of the beautiful books that you can use to help explain it are often not quite age appropriate, or are really tricky because they might have language in them that you mightn't be able to use, or allowed to use, or appropriate to use. So I think using, in the first place, your own community to come in, and having Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from your community come in and explain about it as well. But using books and videos where things are explained. I think the video of the Storybox Library, using the Story Day book, this one, has Kevin Rudd saying sorry, and you can use bits and pieces of that with children as well. So I think there's many ways that we can explain, but it is really tricky and sensitive, and you have to adjust it to your own audience too. You might be in a group with lots of migrant families in there yourself, or with lots of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander, or none. So I think you'll have to adjust it to who is around you and your families around you, in how much and how far you go, and how age appropriate you stay.
Well, thank you for that. What would be your dream for reconciliation in the future?
My dream would be that everyone becomes more and more committed to contribute to the healing journey, and that mainstream television, social media, Aboriginal perspectives are embedded in that and coming past in it, that we turn on the TV and straight away it becomes all part of who we are, with all feeling proud that we can all contribute to this healing journey.